October 2010, Shenandoah National Park. A missing persons report is filed. Imogen Clark, 31. Jude Walker, 27. Their vehicle is found near Skyline Drive Overlook, but no sign of the couple. The search fails. The case goes cold. 1 year later, October 2011, a rucksack is discovered in a wooded hollow. Inside, faded clothes stained with blood and scattered personal effects. The case is reclassified as homicide. Suspects are questioned, arrests are made, but no charges ever stick. To this day, Imogen Clark and Jude Walker remain missing. The evidence is incomplete, the theories conflicting. This is the Hollow case.
It was the last warm weekend before fall closed in, and Shenandoah's trails were alive with campers. Among them were two faces no one would ever see again: Imogen Clark and Jude Walker. Imogen was 31, a London-born makeup artist who had moved to Virginia after marrying Gary Monroe, a construction manager. The marriage had collapsed 15 months before the trip. Friends described the separation as nuclear. Court filings, late-night arguments, and a bitter custody fight over their 3-year-old daughter. To some, Imogen was the wronged wife. To others, she was manipulative, keeping Gary on the hook while flaunting new romances. Jude, at 27, carried his own baggage. He had been released from jail just 2 years earlier after serving 8 months on an assault charge. He insisted he had been defending a friend in a bar fight, but the conviction followed him everywhere. He was trying, a cousin later said, trying to rebuild, but people only saw the record. The two had been dating for just over a year. To outsiders, it looked volatile. Witnesses remembered heated arguments in public places, slamming doors, raised voices, tears one moment and passionate makeups the next. But that October, they seemed united. They told friends they were heading deep off-trail for a weekend camping trip. She wasn't a hiker, not at all. That's what made it strange. She was more about nightlife, salons, parties. If she went into those woods, it was to make a point. Maybe to Jude, maybe to Gary, maybe to both. On October 9th, they were captured on a grainy gas station security camera outside Luray, Virginia. Imogen bought cigarettes and trail mix. Jude paid for a small can of fuel and 2 bottles of water. At 6:47 p.m., they left the station, turned onto the narrow mountain road toward the park, and were never seen again. She looked tired, like she'd been crying. He looked wound up. I remember thinking, these two are not on vacation. When neither returned by Monday, Gary Monroe filed a missing persons report. At first, police suspected a stunt. Imogen had a history of disappearing for days, especially during custody battles, sometimes leaving her daughter with friends. But this time was different. Their car, a beat-up Ford Explorer, was found parked neatly at the Skyline Drive Overlook. Inside were Imogen's purse, Jude's lighter, and a single unopened granola bar. Search teams combed 40 square miles of forest. Helicopters scanned from above. Cadaver dogs sniffed trails that wound down into deep hollows and ravines. For weeks, the park was alive with the sound of searchers calling their names. Nothing. It was like they walked off the face of the earth. No tent, no fire pit, no campsite. No footprints leading away. They just evaporated. As weeks stretched into months, speculation turned darker. Was Jude to blame? Had Imogen staged a disappearance to punish her ex-husband? Or had the Shenandoah claimed them both, leaving their bodies hidden in the vast wilderness? For a year, the case stayed frozen. Rumors multiplied. Gary Monroe faced relentless whispers. Some saw him as a grieving father, others as a man with motive. Jude's family fought to clear his name, insisting the park had swallowed them both. Then, in late October 2011, a year to the week after they vanished, hikers stumbled on something deep in a shaded forest hollow. A sun-bleached rucksack half buried under leaves. Inside were faded clothes, stained with blood. The hollow had finally given up a secret.
The discovery of the rucksack in October 2011 changed everything. For a year, the case of Imogen Clark and Jude Walker had been little more than rumor and frustration. The sun-bleached bag, unearthed in a hollow less than 2 miles from a marked trail, offered investigators their first real piece of evidence. Inside were faded clothes, stiff with dried blood, a cracked compact mirror linked to Imogen, and a torn map with a red X scrawled near the hollow. There were no signs of Jude's belongings. The find reignited suspicion and divided the community. It wasn't just the bag, it was where it was, too close to the trail to be missed for a whole year. That made us wonder, had it been placed there later, or did we fail the first time? Either way, it meant someone wanted it found. Attention quickly swung back to the people in Imogen and Jude's orbit. At the top of the list was Gary Monroe, Imogen's estranged husband. He had reported her missing, sat through press conferences with their daughter on his lap, and given tearful interviews. But when detectives accessed phone records, they discovered something troubling. In the days before the couple vanished, Gary and Imogen exchanged nearly a dozen calls, some stretching past midnight. The nature of those conversations was never revealed, but to police, they painted a picture of unfinished business. I loved my wife, even after we separated. She was the mother of my child. I would never hurt her. I just want her to come home. But Gary was not the only suspect. Jude's past continued to haunt him from beyond the grave, or, as some believed, from hiding. He had served 8 months in jail for assault. He was known for fights, for losing his temper. Some locals said the relationship with Imogen was explosive, built on alcohol and arguments. To them, it wasn't hard to imagine Jude snapping, killing Imogen, and then vanishing into the forest. They were in here 2 weeks before they disappeared, screaming at each other. She threw a glass at him. He stormed out. We all said, one day that boy's gonna lose it. With public pressure mounting, detectives cast a wide net. 5 people were arrested over the next year. Gary Monroe, Jude's cousin who had given him a ride days before the trip, 2 local men rumored to have partied with the couple, and even a park ranger with a history of harassing female hikers. Each time, the news flared with headlines of a break in the case, and each time, the charges collapsed. Lack of evidence, unreliable witnesses, contradictory statements. It was like trying to grab smoke. Everyone had a story. Nobody had proof. One person swore Gary followed them into the woods. Another said Jude had bragged about getting rid of her. And then there were the ones who saw them both alive weeks after the disappearance. It was madness. The community fractured under the weight of suspicion. To some, Imogen was a reckless woman who thrived on drama, dragging men into her chaos. To others, she was a victim of an abusive partner or a jealous husband. Jude, too, split opinion. He was either the violent ex-con everyone expected or a misunderstood man who paid the price for loving the wrong woman.
By the end of 2012, the case was spiraling idle. The rucksack had given investigators a taste of progress, but without bodies, without weapons, without a confession, there was little to hold on to. The hollow had offered a clue, but also a curse, proof of violence without proof of truth. It's worse than knowing they're dead, because we don't know who did it, we don't know why, and we don't even know if Jude's out there somewhere hiding. It's like living inside a nightmare you can't wake up from.
The rucksack was supposed to be a breakthrough. Instead, it became the most haunting mystery of all. Found 1 year after Imogen Clark and Jude Walker vanished, its contents raised more questions than it answered. Investigators examined every item with forensic precision. The blood-soaked clothes were confirmed to belong to Imogen. Fibers from the fabric were matched to garments she had been seen wearing in the gas station footage. The compact mirror, smeared with dried brown stains, carried her fingerprints. And yet there was not a trace of Jude. No blood, no clothing, no personal item. To detectives, it was as if Imogen had bled, but Jude had evaporated. Everything about that bag screamed deliberate. The stains, the placement, the torn map with an X. It felt staged, like someone wanted us to think we'd found the truth, but only a piece of it. Public fascination exploded. Newspapers splashed headlines of the hollow killings, even though no bodies had been found. True crime blogs dissected every clue, every photo of the rucksack, spinning theories of jealous husbands, violent boyfriends, or even serial predators in the park. Police doubled their efforts. They brought back dogs, drones, and divers, combing creeks and caves near the hollow, but nothing surfaced. Without remains, they could not prove murder. Without murder, every suspect became both innocent and guilty at once. As the case dragged on, Imogen's life was pulled apart in the court of public opinion. Old friends described her as reckless, manipulative, someone who enjoyed playing men against each other. Ex-colleagues whispered that she thrived on chaos, that she collected enemies like trophies. To her supporters, these were character assassinations, designed to paint a dead woman as deserving her fate. But to investigators, they raised an uncomfortable question. Had Imogen's tangled relationships created the perfect storm? She wasn't a saint. She lied. She used people. But no one deserves this. No one deserves to just vanish. Jude's reputation fared no better. His prior assault conviction loomed large, often repeated in media coverage, overshadowing his attempts at a quiet life. Former bar acquaintances resurfaced to claim he had a temper, that he bragged about settling scores. But others insisted he was deeply in love with Imogen, devoted to her despite her volatility. Everyone wanted to make him the monster, but he adored her. He'd carry her bag, fix her car, watch her little girl when she let him. He wanted a family. He wasn't hiding in those woods, he was buried in them. And then came the arrests. Gary Monroe once again was hauled into custody after new witnesses claimed they saw his truck near the overlook the night Imogen and Jude disappeared. Charges collapsed when his alibi, a worksite supervisor, proved solid. A former ranger was detained after evidence of harassment surfaced, but no connection to the hollow was found. Even Jude's cousin was briefly held after inconsistent statements, though nothing linked him to the crime. Each arrest brought a surge of hope, and each release left the community more divided. By 2013, the case had become less about finding truth and more about choosing sides. To some, Gary was a jealous husband who never let go. To others, Jude was the violent boyfriend who finally snapped. A third group whispered darker theories about multiple perpetrators, cult activity, or a serial predator using the park as hunting ground. It became folklore. Parents warned their kids, "Don't go into the hollow or you'll end up like Imogen and Jude." It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a ghost story.
But beneath the gossip and headlines, one fact remained unshakable. The rucksack was real. The blood was real. Something terrible had happened in Shenandoah in October 2010. The bag was proof of violence, but not of answers. Two lovers entered the woods. 1 year later, only silence returned.
By the time the Hollow case entered its 3rd year, the search for answers had turned into a trial of character. With no bodies, no murder weapon, and no clear suspect, investigators, journalists, and armchair detectives began filling the void with speculation, painting Imogen Clark and Jude Walker in colors that were anything but flattering. In the absence of truth, reputation became evidence, and reputation is a dangerous kind of evidence. Imogen, once described as vivacious, glamorous, and hard-working, was now recast as reckless, manipulative, and vindictive. Her friends gave interviews in which they described a woman who thrived on drama, who used men against each other, and who treated her relationships like games to be won rather than bonds to be kept. A former co-worker from a cosmetics counter told reporters that Imogen could charm the shirt off your back in one moment and stab you in the next. Another recalled how she often bragged about breaking hearts just to prove she could. Even her family, though careful not to condemn her, admitted she had a volatile streak. Her sister confessed in a tape interview she could be cruel. If she wanted you to suffer, she knew exactly how to do it. That doesn't mean she deserved this, but it means she left behind people who had reasons to be angry. The most damning details came from her marriage to Gary Monroe. Court records, suddenly public through investigative journalists, revealed years of shouting matches, police calls, and even a restraining order filed by Imogen against Gary, though she later dropped it. In turn, Gary filed for emergency custody of their daughter, claiming Imogen was unfit and frequently abandoned the child to go out for days at a time. The custody battle was bitter, and witnesses described it as less about the child and more about control. Detectives returned to the phone logs, those late-night calls between Gary and Imogen just days before she vanished. What had they argued about? Was it reconciliation or final threats? Gary maintained his innocence, claiming the calls were about their daughter's schooling, but for many the timing was too suspicious to ignore. Police fed the speculation with repeated arrests that went nowhere. Gary was detained a second time in early 2013 after a witness claimed to have seen his truck near the overlook on the night of the disappearance. The charge collapsed when cell tower data placed him 30 miles away. Later that year, Jude's cousin was briefly arrested when inconsistencies surfaced in his alibi, but once again, no physical evidence tied him to the Hollow. The former park ranger, already disgraced for misconduct, was also dragged back into headlines, accused of stalking women near trails, but prosecutors admitted they had nothing linking them to Imogen or Jude. Every failed arrest deepened the sense of futility. Families grew bitter. Gary accused police of scapegoating him to appease public pressure. Jude's relatives accused detectives of prejudice, treating his criminal record as destiny rather than history. Even Imogen's family fractured, with some convinced Gary had done it, while others believed Jude had snapped. In interviews, the grief was palpable, but so was the suspicion. Every sentence weighed with the possibility that the person sitting across from them knew the truth. By 2014, the Hollow case was no longer just a missing persons investigation. It had become a cultural obsession, a mirror for people's fears about love, violence, betrayal, and the wilderness itself. Documentaries painted Imogen as a femme fatale, Jude as a dangerous drifter, Gary as the vengeful husband. Podcasts dissected the rucksack's contents with forensic zeal, arguing over whether the map with a red X was a clue, a taunt, or a red herring. Online forums debated theories that ranged from double homicide to lovers' suicide pact to occult sacrifice in the woods. Each version drew believers, none could be proven. The cruelest truth was this: reputations had become stand-ins for evidence. Imogen's flaws, Jude's record, Gary's bitterness, these became the case itself. But reputations cannot close a file, cannot convict in court, cannot return bodies to grieving families. The rucksack sat in its locker, its stains silent, the hollow kept its secrets, and two names, Imogen Clark and Jude Walker, remained etched not in stone graves, but in rumor, suspicion, and whispered legend.
By 2014, the Hollow was no longer just a patch of woodland in Shenandoah. It had become a legend. Hikers spoke of unease when passing the overlook where Imogen Clark and Jude Walker left their car. Local parents warned children not to wander too deep, telling them, "That's where people vanish." The case was cold, officially stalled, yet unofficially alive, burning in newspapers, documentaries, and whispered barroom theories. For the families, it was not folklore, but a wound that refused to heal. Gary Monroe, Imogen's estranged husband, struggled under the crushing duality of being both a grieving father and a perpetual suspect. He withdrew from public life, moving between jobs under different towns, and eventually under different names. In interviews, his bitterness was unmistakable. "They made me a villain because it was easier than admitting they had nothing," he said in 2015. "I loved her once, and I love my daughter still. That should have been enough." But the shadow of the late-night calls, the custody battles, and his proximity to her final days never left him. For some, Gary was the only explanation. For others, he was the most tragic figure of all, a man condemned by circumstance. Jude Walker's absence, meanwhile, became the fulcrum of speculation. Without a body, without even a trace of his belongings, people wondered, did Jude kill Imogen and run? Was he hiding, reinvented in some far-off state or country? Or was he too swallowed by the Hollow, a victim whose remains still lay buried beneath roots and stone? His criminal record and volatile reputation made him an easy target, yet his defenders clung to the belief that he was innocent, that he had been punished twice, once by the justice system, and again by a narrative that cast him as the monster in Imogen's story. Theories grew more elaborate with time. Some believed multiple people were involved, pointing to the staged nature of the rucksack. Who plants a blood-soaked bag with no trace of the other partner? Why leave a map marked with an X, unless it was a message? Amateur sleuths suggested Imogen's disappearance was orchestrated by someone close to her, either Gary, seeking final control, or Jude, desperate to prove something to her. Others whispered about strangers, opportunistic killers, drifters, or even a serial predator stalking the park. There were those who believed the Hollow itself was cursed, citing other disappearances in the region, insisting that the land keeps what it wants. Every community has its ghost story. The Hollow became ours. People say you can still hear them arguing if you camp near there at night. Some swear they see a woman's figure walking the ridge. Whether you believe it or not, it's become part of who we are. Detectives who had worked the case retired one by one, some speaking candidly in later years. Several admitted they suspected Jude, but without a body they could never close the loop. Others leaned toward Gary, citing motive and history. A few confessed they believed both were dead, ambushed by someone who was never caught. Theories, like evidence, contradicted each other. No single explanation fit. The rucksack, the one solid artifact of violence, remained locked in evidence storage, pulled out only for documentaries and anniversary specials. Its faded fabric, the rust-colored stains, the cracked mirror, all became symbols of mystery. The public devoured these images, not realizing how little they truly revealed. Forensic tests had long since exhausted their usefulness. The bag was a riddle written in blood, but not in language. Imogen's daughter grew up far from the spotlight, shielded by Gary from the circus that had consumed her mother's memory. By the time she turned 16, she refused all media contact, leaving her mother's story to strangers who twisted it into drama. For her, it was not mystery, but loss, a hole where a parent should have been. Jude's family likewise retreated, tired of defending him against accusations that never ended.
They clung to hope that his body would one day be found, if only to grant them peace. By the late 2010s, the hollow case had passed into the wider canon of unsolved American disappearances, alongside the Appalachian vanishing myths and cold cases that fueled late-night podcasts. Each retelling warped the facts, sanding off edges or adding new conspiracies. In some versions, Imogen was the villain, a manipulative woman who pushed too far. In others, she was the victim of violent men. Jude, too, shifted roles: killer, accomplice, or ghost. Gary, meanwhile, was always the question mark: resentful husband or wrongly accused father. But the truth, if it ever emerges, will not be found in podcasts, blogs, or barroom whispers. It lies in the soil of Shenandoah, beneath layers of leaves and stone. Somewhere in that forest hollow, the answer waits, whether it is bones or nothing at all. Until then, the hollow remains what it became the moment that rucksack surfaced, a stage for fear, suspicion, and endless whispers.